Good morning. Happy Thursday. I'm Charlotte, and this is Quarantine Story Time. We're reading some War and Peace. It's going to be a short reading this morning, so I'm just going to jump right in to save us time. We're reading Volume 3, Part 1. We're going to read section 20 and 21 today. And as you recall, we were following the Rostovs and Natasha Rostov's recovery from her illness, her heartbreak over, basically how she broke her own heart, but how she was misled, and her and Andrei Bolkonsky broke up, broken heart, her recovery, Pierre's involvement in that, and Pierre, and with his usual hilarity, is trying to figure out different nuanced things, apocalypse, prophecies, Napoleon, and has decided that he is supposed to be part of it, but he's not supposed to do anything. He's somehow part of this. So we're somewhere around there. Let's jump in. Section 20. At the Rostovs, as always on Sunday, some of their closest acquaintances were dining. Pierre came early so as to catch them alone. During that, Pierre had grown so fat that he could have been monstrous if he had not been so tall, so large of limb, and so strong that he obviously bore his corpulence lightly. He went up the stairs, puffing and muttering something to himself. His coachman no longer asked if he should wait. He knew that when the Count went to the Rostovs, it was till midnight. The Rostovs' footman joyfully rushed to help him off with his cloak and take his stick and hat. From club habit, Pierre left his stick and hat in the front hall. The first person he saw at the Rostovs was Natasha. Even before he saw her, while taking off his cloak in the front hall, he heard her. She was singing her solfeggios in the reception room. He knew that she had not sung since the time of her illness, and therefore was surprised and glad to hear the sound of her voice. He quietly opened the door and saw Natasha in her violet dress, which she had worn to church, strolling about the room and singing. She had her back to him when he opened the door, but when she turned abruptly and saw his fat, astonished face, she blushed and quickly went over to him. "I want to try singing again," she said. "It's something to do, after all," she added as if apologizing. "Wonderful! How glad I am you've come. I'm so happy today," she said with the old animation, which Pierre had not seen for a long time. "You know, Nicholas was awarded the St. George Cross. I'm so proud of him." "Of course, it was I who sent the order." "Well, I don't want to hinder you," he added, and was about to go to the drawing room. Natasha stopped him. "Count, is it wrong of me to sing?" she asked, blushing, but gazing at Pierre questioningly, not turning her eyes away. "No. Why? On the contrary. But why do you ask me?" "I don't know myself," Natasha replied quickly. I wouldn't want to do anything that you wouldn't like. I trust you in everything. You don't know how important you are to me and how much you've done for me." She spoke quickly and did not notice how Pierre blushed at those words. "I saw in the same order that he, Bolkonsky," she uttered that name in a quick whisper, "is in Russia and serving again. What do you think?" she said quickly, clearly hurrying to speak because she feared for her strength. "Will he forgive me someday? Won't he always have angry feelings towards me? What do you think? What do you think?" "I think," said Pierre, "there's nothing for him to forgive. If I were in his place—" By a connection of memory, Pierre was instantly transported in animation to the time when, in comforting her, he had told her that if he were not himself, but the best man in the world and free, he would go on his knees and ask for her hand. And the same feeling of pity, tenderness, and love came over him, and the same words were on his lips, but she gave him no time to say them. "Yes, you, she said, pronouncing the word you with delight, "are a different matter. I don't know a man who is kinder, better, more magnanimous than you, and there can't be one. If you hadn't been there, and now too, I don't know what would happen to me, because—" Tears suddenly welled up in her eyes, and she turned away, raised the music to her eyes, and began to sing and pace the reception room. Just then Petya came running in from the drawing room. Petya was now a handsome, ruddy, 15-year-old boy with plump red lips and resembled Natasha. He was preparing for the university, but lately, with his friend Obolensky, had secretly decided to join the Hussars. Petya had run out to his namesake in order to talk the matter over. He had asked him to find out whether they would take him into the Hussars. Pierre walked towards the drawing room, not listening to Petya. Petya pulled him by the arm to attract his attention. "Well, what about my business, Pyotr Kirillich?" For God's sake, you're my only hope, said Petya. Ah, yes, your business. What about the hussars? I'll tell you, I'll tell you. Today I'll tell you everything. Well, mon cher, did you get the manifesto? Asked the old count. My little countess went to the liturgy at the Rizmovskis and heard a new prayer. A very good one, she says. I've got it, said Pierre. Tomorrow the sovereign will be here. There will be an extraordinary assembly of the nobility, and they say a conscription of 10 men per 1,000. Ah, yes, I congratulate you. Yes, yes, thank God. Well, and what news from the army? Our side has retreated again. Near Smolensk already, they say, replied Pierre. My God, said the count. So where is the manifesto? The appeal. Ah, yes, said Pierre, hunting for the papers in his pockets, and could not find them. Continuing to slap his pockets, he kissed the hand of the countess who came in, looked around uneasily, evidently waiting for Natasha, who was no longer singing but had not yet come to the drawing room. By God, I don't know where I put them, he said. Well, really, he's forever losing things, said the countess. Natasha came in and with a face softened by emotion, sat down, looking silently at Pierre. As soon as she entered the room, Pierre's face, downcast till then, brightened, and while he went on searching for the paper, he looked at her several times. By God, I'll go fetch it. I left it at home, certainly. Well, you'll be late for dinner. Ah, my coachman has driven off. But Sonia, who had gone to the front hall to look for the papers, found them in Pierre's hat, tucked carefully under the lining. Pierre was about to start reading. No, after dinner, said the old count, clearly anticipating great pleasure from this reading. Over dinner, at which they drank champagne to the health of the new Chevalier of St. George, Shinshin told them the town news about the illness of an old Georgian princess, about Medivier's disappearance from Moscow, about how they brought some German to Rostopchin and announced to him that he was a spine. So Count Rostopchin told him it himself, and how Count Rostopchin ordered the spine set free, telling the folk that he was not a spine, just a prickly old German. Catch them. They catch them, said the count. I even told the countess to speak less French. Now's not the time. Have you heard? Said Shinshin. Prince Golitsyn has hired a Russian teacher. He's taking lessons in Russian. Il commence à devenir dangereux de parler français dans les rues. Well now, Count Pyotr Kirillich, once they start calling up the militia, you'll have to go on horse too, said the old count, addressing Pierre. Pierre had been silent and pensive all through dinner. As if not understanding, he looked at the count when he addressed him. Yes, to war, he said. No, what kind of warrior am I? Anyhow, it's all so strange. So strange, I don't understand it myself. I don't know. I'm so far from having any taste for the military. But nowadays, nobody can answer for himself. After dinner, the count settled comfortably in an armchair, and with a serious face asked Sonia, who was famous for her skill at reading, to read. To our first-throned capital, Moscow. The enemy has entered within the borders of Russia with great forces. He comes to devastate our beloved fatherland. Sonia read diligently in her high little voice. The count listened, his eyes closed, sighing fitfully in certain places. Natasha sat erect, looking searchingly and directly now at her father, now at Pierre. Pierre felt her gaze on him and tried not to look at her. The countess shook her head disapprovingly and crossly at each solemn phrase of the manifesto. In all these words she saw only the dangers which threatened her son would not soon end. Shinshin, composing his mouth into a mocking smile, was obviously preparing to mock at the first thing that presented itself for mockery. At Sonia's reading, at what the count would say, even at the appeal itself, if no better pretext appeared. Having read about the dangers that threatened Russia, about the hopes the sovereign placed in Moscow, especially in its illustrious nobility, Sonia, with a tremor in his voice, caused mainly by the attention with which she was being listened to, read the last words. We ourselves will not be slow to stand amidst our people in that capital and other places of our realm, for consultation and for the guidance of all our armed forces, both those who already obstruct the enemy's path and those newly formed for his defeat, wherever he may appear. May the ruin to which he hopes to reduce us turn back upon his own head, and may a Europe freed from the slavery glorify the name of Russia. That's the way, the count cried, opening his wet eyes and breaking off several times to sniff, as if a vial of some strong-smelling salts had just been put under his nose. The sovereign need only say it, and we'll sacrifice everything with no regrets. Before Shinshin had time to tell the joke he had prepared about the Count's patriotism, Natasha jumped up from her place and ran over to her father. "What a darling he is, this papa," she said, kissing him, and she again glanced at Pierre with that unconscious coquetry which had come back to her along with her animation. "There's a little patriot for you," said Shinshin. "Not a little patriot at all, but just," Natasha replied touchily. "Everything's funny to you, and this isn't a joke at all." "Some joke," the Count repeated. "He need only say the word, and we'll all go. We're not some sort of Germans." "And did you notice," said Pierre, "that it said for consultation?" "Well, whatever it's for." Just then Petya, to whom no one paid attention, went up to his father, all read in a breaking voice, now gruff, now shrill, said, "Well, so Papa dear, I'd say definitely, and Mama too, like it or not, I'd say definitely that you'll let me go into the military service, because otherwise I can't, that's all." The Countess raised her eyes to heaven with horror, clasped her hands, and turned angrily to her husband. "There's your talking for you," she said. But the Count recovered from his excitement that same moment. "Well, well," he said, "another warrior, forget this foolishness. You must study." "It's not foolishness, Papa. Fedya Obolensky is younger than I am, and he's going, and the main thing is that, anyhow, I can't study anything now when—" Petya stopped, blushing hotly, and managed to bring out, "when the fatherland is in danger." "Enough, enough, it's foolishness." "But you said yourself we'd sacrifice everything." "Petya, be quiet, I'm telling you," the Count cried, glancing at his wife, who, turning pale, was looking with fixed eyes at her younger son. "And I'm telling you, with Pyotr Kirillovich here will say, I'm telling you, it's nonsense. The milk isn't dry on your lips, and you want to serve in the army." "Well, well, I'm telling you," said the Count, taking the papers with him, probably in order to read them once more in his study before napping, started out of the room. "Pyotr Kirillovich, what do you say? We go for a smoke?" Pierre found himself in confusion and irresolution. Natasha's unusually brilliant and animated eyes, constantly turned to him, with more than affection, had brought him to that state. "No, I think I'll go home." "What do you mean home? You wanted to spend the evening with us. You rarely come as it is, and this girl of mine," the Count said good-naturedly, pointing to Natasha, "is only cheerful when you're here." "Yes, but I forgot. I really must go home. Things to do," Pierre said hurriedly. "Well, goodbye then," said the Count, leaving the room altogether. "Why are you going? Why are you upset? Why?" Natasha asked Pierre, looking challengingly into his eyes. "Because I love you," he wanted to say, but he did not say it, blushed to the point of tears, and lowered his eyes. "Because it's better that I visit you less often. Because, no, I simply have things to do." "But why? No, tell me," Natasha began resolutely, and suddenly fell silent. They both looked at each other in fright and confusion. He tried to smile, but could not. His smile expressed suffering, and he silently kissed her hand and left. Pierre decided to himself that he would not visit the Rostovs any more. Section 21. After the resolute refusal he had received, Petya went to his room and, locking himself in, wept bitterly. Everyone pretended to notice nothing but when he came to tea, silent and gloomy, with tearful eyes. The next day the sovereign arrived. Several of the Rostovs' domestics asked permission to go and look at the Tsar. That morning Petya spent a long time getting dressed, combing his hair, arranging his collar the way grown-ups do. He frowned into the mirror, gesticulated, shrugging his shoulders, and finally, without telling anyone, put on his peaked cap and left the house by the back door, trying not to be noticed. Petya had decided to go directly to the place where the sovereign was and explain directly to some gentleman in waiting. Petya thought that a sovereign was always surrounded by gentlemen in waiting, that he, Count Rostov, despite his youth, wished to serve the fatherland, that youth could be no hindrance to devotion, and that he was prepared. While getting ready to go, Petya had prepared many fine words which he would say to the gentleman in waiting. Petya was counting on the success of his undertaking precisely because he was a child. Petya even thought of how everyone would be astonished at his youth. And yet in the arrangement of his collar, in his hairstyle, and in his slow, sedate walk, he managed to make himself look like an old man. But the further he went, the more distracted he was by the ever-increasing number of people near the Kremlin. The more he forgot to maintain the slowness and sedateness proper to grown-up people. As he approached the Kremlin, he already began to worry about being jostled, and with a menacing look he resolutely stuck out his elbows. But at the Trinity Gate, in spite of all his resoluteness, people who probably did not know what a patriotic purpose he was going to the Kremlin for, so pressed him to the wall that he had to submit and stop, while carriages passed into the archway with a hollow rumble. Next to Petya stood a peasant woman, a footman, 2 merchants, and a retired soldier. After standing by for a while in the gateway, Petya, unwilling to wait until all the carriages went by, wanted to start moving ahead before the others and resolutely began to work with his elbows. But the peasant woman, standing in his way, to whom he first applied his elbow, angrily shouted at him, "What are you shoving for, little master? See, everyone's standing. What's all this pushing for?" "Anybody can push in that case," said the footman, and also beginning to work with his elbows, he squeezed Petya into the stinking corner of the gateway. Petya wiped his sweat-covered face with his hands and straightened the sweat-soaked collar he had arranged so well, like a grown-up, at home. Petya felt that he looked unpresentable and was afraid that, if he appeared before the gentleman in waiting like that, he would not be admitted to the sovereign. But owing to the crowd, it was quite impossible to set himself right and move to another place. One of the generals driving by was an acquaintance of the Rostovs. Petya wanted to ask for his help, but considered that it would be unmanly. When all the carriages had gone past, the crowd poured through and brought Petya out on the square, which was filled with people, not only on the square, but on all the glacis, even on the glacis, on the roofs. Everywhere there were people. As soon as Petya found himself on the square, he clearly heard the sounds of the bells and the joyful talk of people that filled the whole Kremlin. For a time, the square was less crowded, but suddenly all heads were covered. Everyone rushed forward somewhere. All heads were uncovered. Everyone rushed forward somewhere. Petya was pressed so hard that he could not breathe, and everyone shouted, "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" Petya stood on tiptoe, shoved, pinched, but could see nothing except the people around him. In all faces there was the same general expression of tenderness and rapture. A merchant woman standing beside Petya sobbed, and tears poured from her eyes. "Father, angel dearest," she murmured, wiping her tears from her with her fingers. "Hurrah!" came on all sides. For a moment the crowd stood in one place, then again it rushed forward. Petya, forgetting himself, clenched his teeth, rolled his eyes out wildly, and rushed forward, working with his elbows and shouting, "Hurrah!" as if he was ready to kill himself and everyone else at that moment, but exactly the same wild face came at him from the sides with the shouts of "Hurrah!" So this is what the sovereign is, Petya thought. No, it's impossible for me to hand him a petition myself. It's too bold. In spite of which, he made his way forward just as desperately and saw, flashing between the backs of those ahead of him, the empty space and a passage laid with red cloth. But just then the crowd heaved backwards. The policemen ahead shoved back those who got too close to the procession, and the sovereign passed from the palace to the cathedral of the Dormition. And Petya unexpectedly received such a blow in the ribs from the side, and was so squeezed that everything suddenly went dim in his eyes, and he lost consciousness. When he came to, some clergyman with a clump of graying hair tied back in a shabby blue cassock, probably a beadle, was holding him under the arm with one hand and protecting him from the pressing crowd with the other. "The young gentleman has been crushed," the beadle was saying. "Such goings on! Ease up! He's crushed! Crushed!" The sovereign went into the cathedral of the Dormition. The crowd subsided again, and the beadle led Petya, pale and barely breathing, to the Sarkanin. Several people felt sorry for Petya, and suddenly the whole crowd turned to him. Now there was a crush around him. Those who stood near attended to him, unbuttoned his frock coat, sat him up on the cannon, and reproached somebody, whoever had crushed him. "You could crush somebody to death that way. What is it? Committing murder. See the dear heart, he's gone white as a sheet," the voices said. Petya soon recovered. The color returned to his face. The pain disappeared for this temporary unpleasantness. He acquired a place on the cannon from which he hoped to see the sovereign, who should be coming back that way. Petya was no longer thinking of petitioning. If only he could see him, he would consider himself happy. During this service in the cathedral of the Dormition, which was a combined prayer service on the occasion of the sovereign's arrival, with a prayer of thanksgiving for the concluding peace with the Turks, the crowd spread out. Hawkers appeared, offering kvass, gingerbread, poppy seed cakes, which Petya especially fancied, and ordinary conversations were heard. One merchant's wife displayed her torn shawl, telling how much she had paid for it. Another said that today all silk fabrics had become expensive. The beadle, Petya's savior, talked with an official about who were serving that day with the bishop. The beadle several times repeated the word "concelebration," which Petya did not understand. 2 young tradesmen bantered with servant girls who were cracking nuts. All this talk, especially the bantering with the girls, which for a boy of Petya's age was especially alluring, all this talk did not concern Petya now. He sat on his lofty cannon, as excited as ever at the thought of the sovereign and of his love for him. The feeling of pain and fear when he was being crushed, blended with the feeling of rapture and increased in him still more the awareness of the importance of this moment. Suddenly, cannon shots were heard from the embankment. The shooting was in celebration of the peace with the Turks, and the crowd swiftly rushed to the embankment to watch how they were shooting. Petya also wanted to run there, but the beadle, having taken the young gentleman under his protection, would not let him. The shooting was still going on when officers, generals, and gentlemen-in-waiting came running out of the cathedral. Then others came out less hurriedly. Then hats were taken off, and those who had run to look at the cannon came running back. Finally, 4 more men in uniforms and sashes came through the doors of the cathedral. "Hurrah! Hurrah!" the crowd shouted again. "Which is he? Which is he?" Petya asked all around in a tearful voice. But no one answered him. They were all too carried away, and Petya, having selected one of the 4 persons, whom he could not make out clearly because of the tears of joy that welled up in his eyes, concentrated all his rapture on him, although he was not the sovereign, shouted "Hurrah!" in a frantic voice, and decided that tomorrow, whatever it might cost him, he would be in the military. The crowd ran after the sovereign, accompanied him to the palace, and began to disperse. It was already late. Petya had eaten nothing. He was streaming with sweat, but he could not go home, and together with the diminished but still quite large crowd, stood before the palace, looking through the palace windows while the sovereign dined, expecting something further, and equally envious both of the dignitaries who drove up the entrance and to the sovereign's dinner, and of the palace footmen who served at the table and flitted past the windows. At dinner with the sovereign, Veleuve said, glancing out the window, "The people still hope to see your majesty." The dinner was already over. The sovereign stood up, finishing a biscuit, went out to the balcony. The people, with Petya among them, rushed to the balcony. "Angel, father, hurrah! Dearest," cried the people, and Petya, and again peasant women and a few men of the weaker sort, including Petya, wept with happiness. A rather large piece of biscuit that the sovereign was holding broke off, fell onto the railing of the balcony, and from there to the ground. A cabby in a jerkin, who was standing closest of all, rushed to this piece of biscuit and snatched it up. Some people in the crowd rushed to the cabby, noticing that the sovereign asked for a plate of biscuits to be brought noticing that the sovereign asked for a plate of biscuits to be brought and began tossing biscuits from the balcony. Petya's eyes became bloodshot. The danger of being crushed aroused him still more. He rushed for the biscuits. He did not know why, but it was necessary to take a biscuit from the Tsar's hands, and necessary not to give it up. He rushed and tripped up a little old woman who was trying to catch a biscuit. The little old woman did not consider herself defeated, though she was lying on the ground. She tried to catch a biscuit, but kept missing. Petya knocked her arm aside with his knee, snatched a biscuit, and as if afraid to be late, shouted, "Hurrah!" in a voice now grown hoarse. The sovereign went in, and after that, the greater part of the people began to disperse. "See, I said to keep waiting, and I was right," people said joyfully from various sides. Happy as Petya was, he still felt sad to go home and know that all the pleasure of that day was over. From the Kremlin, Petya did not go home, but to his friend Obolensky, who was also 15 and who wanted to join a regiment. Returning home, he announced resolutely and firmly that, if they would not let him, he would run away. The next day, Count Ilya Andreich, though not yet quite giving in, went to find out how he could arrange to set Petya up in some less dangerous place. And that is the reading for today. The foolishness of youth. These kids, man. I don't get it. And I feel like it's still something that, even today, there's like something in some people that like, they have to fight. And like, which is, I'm sure, a good thing at times. But like, he's a kid. His voice is still cracking. He's getting knocked over in crowded places. I don't know if he can handle like being shot at and having to shoot at other people or bayoneting people. Even his older brother, who's been doing it for a little bit now, when he got close to someone, he hit them once and then like wasn't paused before actually killing them. This is war people. Anyways, and it's interesting to hear how everyone reacts to the Tsar. It's like this rapturous, like celebrity thing, which, yeah, it's like celebrities now, I guess. But anyways, I got to dash off. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow.